This is VOCM Open Line. Call 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626. The views and opinions of this program are not necessarily those of this station. The biggest conversation in Newfoundland and Labrador starts now. Here's VOCM Open Line host Paddy Daly.
Well, all right, and good morning to you. Thank you so much for tuning into the program. It's Thursday, May the 15th. This is Open Line. I'm your host, Paddy Daly, David Williams. He's produced the program. Let's get it going. If you're in the St. John's metro region, the number to dial to get in the queue and on the air, 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. So while some hockey viewing eyeballs will be on the Men's World Championship of Hockey over in Denmark and in Sweden, so Canada trying to build on its undefeated record, got the Austrians today. The Austrians always pose that little sneaky opportunity for an underdog to get through one of the big dogs, but yeah. The most of the hockey world, certainly in North America, is watching the NHL playoffs. As much as the Toronto Maple Leafs are not my team, I feel bad for Leafs fans. I really do. And it's not about the 1967 issue either. It's in the recent past, just a motley effort in the playoffs. Like here we are, Game 5 at home, a chance to really put the pressure on the defending Stanley Cup champions, and came out flat. Listless performance. Really not good enough. And I know it takes the wind out of your sails when your goaltender, in this case Jacob Wall, can't get a big stop when you need it, but they got absolutely pummeled. And now back to Florida for Game 6, so anyway, I'm sure there's lots of frustrated Leafs fans out there this morning. The Oilers advanced to the next round, though, with a 1-0 overtime win yesterday, off to the Western Conference Finals, and maybe Winnipeg can stave off elimination tonight. They're down 3-1, but anyway, there you go. A little baseball. On this date, 1941, New York Yankees' Joe DiMaggio started his 56-game hitting streak. One hit, one RBI in a 13-1 loss to the visiting Chicago White Sox. I mean, people think this is the unbreakable record. The closest anyone's come to it in the modern day is Pete Rose back in 1978 in 44 consecutive games. Only 37 players in the history of Major League Baseball have had a hit in 30 consecutive games or more. So DiMaggio, it was not without some fanfare during that time. Okay, during the 56 games, he only struck out 5 times. 5 times in 56 games. He had 15 home runs, 55 RBIs, 91 base hits, and a 223 at-bats, and a 408 average. You can put that record away. I'll probably eat my words on that one. All right. So here we go, home stretch in the K-12 system. I try to put education out there as much as possible because I think that's where it belongs. Absolutely firmly on the front burner. So let's bring forward whatever you're seeing with your child in school. And we know that the Health Accord is an exercise that's ongoing. We're in the first year of trying to draft what the future of the K-12 delivery system will look like. We will indeed touch base with the co-chairs before long, Drs. Goodenow and Burke. But let's talk about it. Like, some things have changed dramatically in school, whether it be how the students are allowed to access their cell phone to deal with disruption in class. So people talk about the digital pylon, and that's a problem. There were some questions in the House of Assembly regarding violence in schools, which is obviously a problem. The frequency with which law enforcement has to be called, which indicates the potential for a crime as opposed to people making fun of each other and calling people names. So let's take that on. I'm still waiting for some pragmatic guidance or commentary from the provincial government on one of the key issues is the chronic absenteeism. I seem to be one of the few who thinks about it, but just one more time to drive that point home. If you're chronically absent in grade 6, only 10% of those students will graduate from high school. That obviously poses an incredible problem down the road, so we can take it on. This one story, it might not be something you think about unless your child has a mobility issue. And of course, this is the concept of accessibility. With so many of the province's schools that are fairly old, and of course, when they were originally built, we possibly weren't quite enlightened enough to apply the concept of universal design. And so consequently, we have a lot of schools in the province that are pretty inaccessible for any child who has an accessibility issue. Don't mean to pick on one school because I know of a few myself right here in this region, but out in Corner Brook, at Ecole CC Laughlin Elementary. So if you can't navigate the stairs, you're out of luck. So there's a story that includes the story of this person who had fractured their ankle during soccer practice, I think it was, and struggling to get where he needs to go with battling the stairs. There's no lift, there's no elevator. And here's where it gets a little bit more frustrating, I would imagine, for parents in the region. If you have a child in a wheelchair, or you have a child that has serious mobility issues and wants to do early French immersion in Corner Brook, you're out of luck. Can't have it. Now, I know retrofits are expensive, and I know building new buildings purpose-built to deal with accessibility is a big price tag, but the kids deserve better. So where to from here? But just imagine, you have a family and you're interested in your child getting early French immersion, living in one of the province's cities, and you can't do it because your kid cannot navigate the school and the stairs without the lift and without the elevator. Then it's that time of year where, so please, let's talk about anything in education. It's that time of year, too, when you talk about enrolling for Kinder Start, which is a very helpful program to get your child used to their upcoming surroundings. But then it's thinking about whether or not French immersion is something you're interested in. Look, I'm not fully bilingual, and I'm not pushing it, but there are distinct upsides based on entering early French immersion. The one concern people have, and understandably so, is if you don't have a parent that is fluently bilingual, you'd think that you're going to be unable to help your child. But generally speaking, the material that comes home, because remember, in kindergarten, you're only learning French at a kindergarten level. So you kind of learn along with your kid. I learned a lot when my boys were in French immersion. But if you talk about things, what it means in the long term, and people worry about whether or not your English is going to be strong if you go to school in French, the research is pretty clear. It can not only improve literacy and cognitive skills, but it can actually sharpen your first language, being English. So I'm not trying to convince you to do anything, but a lot of people just simply think early French immersion, no. Why? Because the extent of my French is Guy Lafleur Bibliothèque. Totally get it, but there's a lot of families, I would imagine, struggling with that. And in the world of accessibility and mobility concerns, we cannot let the conversation go as to whether or not the province should, and I believe they should, appoint a disabilities advocate and a fully staffed office. A third of the population is disabled. You know, doesn't that say enough to justify the need for a disabilities advocate? If you want to talk about it, we can do it. All right, we'll pick up on the wildfires that devastated parts of Conception Bay North. So some of the folks who are eligible may be able to avail of support from the Federal Disaster Assistance Relief Fund. The province continues to talk about whether or not they'll be involved in any assistance in the effort to rebuild. The devastation is real. Apparently Premier Hogan was out there yesterday to see it up close as to how bad it is. So a few things. We need to do better in preparation for wildfires, and this one will be unwelcomed in some corners. And this is not necessarily about wildfires, but it's about fire. In many smaller communities, unless you have your own volunteer fire department, you have to look outside the boundaries of your community and sign up for fire protection services with the next closest area that has a fire department. The issue there, as my understanding, is unless it's unanimous for all of the residents to be willing to pay a nominal fee towards availing of fire protection services, if it's not unanimous, it doesn't come to town. We've had examples in the past where houses have burnt to the ground simply because they did not have a contractual arrangement with the next community over that actually had fire protection services. For the neighbors, just say, for instance, you didn't want to sign on and your home catches on fire, it burns to the ground, and unfortunately, so does your neighbors. And your neighbor would have been full-throated support for paying that fee to get the fire protection service. I think we've got to address that. Maybe it's time. People don't like government being heavy-handed and things are mandatory. But for the residents who are willing to pay the fee, and some of their neighbors are not, then the entire community is in jeopardy. So I wonder where we go from there. And of course, also, to throw it out there one more time, probably important for municipalities, whether it be guidance coming from MNL and or a committee to be formed to represent local service districts, it's probably time to, get with the times and have civic addresses as part of the reality for first responders to be able to get to you on time. Let's talk about it. All right. Had a couple of emails in the past couple of days about the elimination of sugar tax. Again, not the biggest line item in the world, but tens of millions of dollars have come into the government, and we know based on the documentation that it simply did not work as it was intended. The question's being asked as to whether or not that's going to see any compromised funding for the continuous glucose monitoring program and for the school lunch program. The government has said, no, it won't. And that's good news, because that could not be the case. There's other revenue streams that can be funneled into those two. They actually talked about expanding both programs, which I think is welcome news. Mentioned schools a little earlier, and now the school lunch program. Can someone out there let me know how quickly the school lunch program is being implemented in the schools across the province, because not every school is created equal. Some schools don't even have a cafeteria, let alone the equipment required. And there's some money there for the equipment, but not every school even has the space. So the province was the first to sign on to the school lunch program, the federally funded program. But where are we? Has it been advanced with any reasonable measure? I don't know. But where you are, your information would be helpful. So let's talk about that. All right, what do we got here? Whether we're talking housing or healthcare or education or criminal justice or what have you, for the vast majority of people listening to the program this morning, it's cost of living issues and what role the government can play. On that front, because just yesterday we talked to Josh Smee, the CEO of Food First NL, about the food insecurity issues, and it is only getting worse, especially when we talk about children and single-parent families. So Tony Wakeham, leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Newfoundland and Labrador, has pointed to 3 key areas as to where he thinks the government needs to focus regarding cost of living. Number 1, increase the number of families who can receive the NL child benefit. Hard to deny that. I think that's a pretty important one. We've seen it. People will question whether or not families are going to spend their money, any increased money from the government, in the most important areas of their life. But by and large, especially if you look at the federal child tax benefit, it has worked. So that one. He's also talked about increasing the seniors benefit by 20%. It has been increased, and it only catches about 50,000 people in the province, seniors in the province. And when you look at food insecurity, apparently, so says the Stats Canada numbers and Josh Smee, is that's not the biggest concern on that area. But of course, fixed income is a conversation we need to have on the federal front as well. Then this one's important. Ensure that no one in the province has to pay to see a nurse practitioner. For me, this is a no-brainer. I know the arguments are made that, we need to keep the nurse practitioners in the public system, but for the general public, for us, well, I can only speak for myself. If I go to a private office in a private clinic operated by nurse practitioners and they bill MCP on my behalf as opposed to me pay cash on the barrelhead, all I'm really concerned with is the help that I get. No way it's going to be any more expensive for nurse practitioners to be paid through MCP. So if we're talking access to primary care, and there's some federal moves afront about healthcare transfers maybe being somewhat jeopardized if there's not that type of program that comes to this province. So those are 3 pretty good focus areas, and if you want to pick up on any of those, we can do it. And also, this story is not going away. And you can bet your bottom dollar this will be used aggressively in the upcoming campaign, whenever that might be, provincially, about the big tobacco settlement. You can count on it. The Tories will have the ability to point to a variety of things. It's a stressful time. There's lots of issues to be broached. And this one will be, I would say, featured in a lot of ads and in commentary coming from opposition politicians and candidates. While technically allowed by law and an approved accounting practice to apply all of the $520 million coming to the province to 1 year's budget, even though the guarantees, I think, are fleeting, and using the word if is a real big 2-letter word in this case, while it might be technically approved, and maybe the government could have convinced the Auditor General to approve of this strategy, the fact of the matter is we found out after the fact. Wasn't in the budget speech, wasn't broached publicly until the government, or whoever found out about it, broached the government and asked those questions, and here we are. So you can count on it. The buzzwords that have been the key feature of campaigns, federally and provincially, for quite a long time, are accountability and transparency. So it's in every political party's best interest to do their level best to do exactly that. Why? Number 1, it's the right thing to do. Number 2, you owe us. And number 3, it's politically advantageous to come across as exactly that. So you can bet on that, and we can take that on in the program if you're so inclined. Dave, I'd like to speak with Scott Penny. Just popped in my mind, Port of Argentia. The question's being asked, what's next for the port? Now that Cenovus' gravity-based structure, which is an engineering marvel, has been towed out into Placentia Bay, still lots of activity at the Port of Argentia. Some 40 businesses operate at the port. Then they're talking about continuing Pattern Energy. That's the group that's talking about bringing the hydrogen model. And so apparently Mr. Penny and the port are in conversations that they say are very real, and he's hamstrung somewhat with a non-disclosure agreement. That possibility to have something the size and the impact of Long Harbour to be fueled completely by emission-free green hydrogen. So they're not letting it go. And we can take it on, just like we took on the conversation regarding the future of bull arm and the importance that is for the economic driver that a can and should be into the future. And in the mining world, you know, let's take on the Upper Churchill Memorandum of Understanding, because some folks in Labrador, who for the most part have kind of been on the outside looking in at hydroelectricity, is one of the key features, I would imagine, if you're in the mining business and if you're a Labradorian, is the quadrupling of the recall block from the Upper Churchill, which really does give them more leeway to see expansion proposals come to the government's table. So there's a variety of upsides there. Oh, and this just popped in my mind. Also, maybe Jordan Brown can fill us in, the NDP member for Lab West. Has the government made any further steps down the road to do what they said they would do, and that's commit and conduct another dust study? We understand dust, and we understand the ways to keep the dust tempered or keep it down, but things have changed. Mining has expanded. So understanding what exactly is going on in the dust world to ensure that the strategy to protect the residents in the area, because if you've seen the pictures, it's like there was a wildfire, but there's no fire. It's just dust. So let's talk about it. All right, a couple of quickies before we get to, and these are big ones. I probably went too long on the other ones. So apparently the recount in the federal riding of Tyrone over the peninsulas, where currently Anthony Germain was successful over Conservative challenger Jonathan Rowe to the tune of 12 votes. Apparently that recount, which started Monday, is going to take yet another few days. Remarkable stuff. Apparently there are 1,041 disputed ballots. Now, there might be reasons why people have struggled to vote correctly on a ballot that will be accepted, but 1,041 is a ton. It probably includes the 579 that were rejected in the initial count, but that's a huge number of votes where people were unable to simply strike the ballot as instructed, but here we go, not settled. And in the province of Quebec, the federal riding of Terrebonne, which we know has seen the seat flip to the Liberals by the tune of one vote. And one voter who voted for the Bloc Québécois candidate saw their ballot returned to sender. So there was mistakes made not by that voter, but by the ballot itself in Elections Canada. The last three characters in the postal code were incorrect. Now, Elections Canada says, by their law, of course, elections are determined by law in this country, they say that that ballot cannot be counted. Oh, man. It's so important to get this right. Even if that's the law as it stands, and apparently the Bloc Québécois cannot bring forward a court appeal, a challenge, the voter themselves has to file it. So whether or not that brings along some financial support, say for instance from the Bloc Québécois, but riding settled by one vote, no matter what we've got to do, we've got to ensure that gets done right. Last couple. So here we go. Minority Parliament, and we're off to the races. Couple of things where people will not be pleased to hear. Now, if you're in the middle class and there's going to be, by the swipe of a pen, which does still require legislative approval for a tax cut for the middle class with the minority parliament, so that still has to happen. But we're now told that when they go back into the House of Commons, that there won't be a budget table before the summer. Man, oh man. Tens of billions, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $70 billion worth of pledges have been brought forward in short order by the Liberal minority government, but no budget going to be delivered? Man, when we talk about accountability, one of the surefire ways to understand exactly where government is going, the direction and the money, is a budget. So there's no doubt in my mind they'd be able to get enough support for an additional 2 votes to get a budget through, but this is not great, to say the least, especially with all the money that's being spent without a budget being passed in Parliament. You want to talk about it. Also, I think we should dig into the housing strategy too. Probably don't have time for me to break it down the way I was intending before I started babbling on here this morning, but anything in that world, let's get at it. Then natural resources, which will be a big conversation, whether it be the whole thought of Western alienation and, or of course, natural resources future in this province. That's on the table. And just a quick reminder to government officials, including Stephen Guilbeault and former Prime Minister Trudeau, when there's thought of pipelines, and I think it's highly questionable as to whether or not the amount of pipelines people in Alberta in particular want to see built are ever going to get built for a variety of reasons, and not just about political roadblocks, is the concept of the East-West corridor. We've got to figure it out. That's a big deal for this province. You can talk about approvals for LNG and approvals for pipelines, some of which are pipe dreams, I think, not because we'll see the Bloc Québécois blocking, because the Bloc Québécois won't have any say. It'll be the governing party in the province of Quebec, in this instance, where the people see them as the true barrier to this play. But the Prime Minister has doubled down on the East-West Energy Corridor, which might include a pipeline, but importantly for this province, it'll be about electricity, hydroelectricity. So I know there's an awful lot there, and we can indeed break down what the government is saying is a Second World War type of effort to build homes. But the whole concept of adding a different layer of bureaucracy, I think it's Build Canada Home or Build Home Canada, always adds skepticism to my thoughts. Bureaucracy is expensive and bureaucracy is slow. They talk about building 500,000 units a year. The number one problem is going to be whether or not you can build any of these homes, modular or otherwise, and hit the affordability target. Affordability is generally defined as 30% of your income. In the last go-around in the $50 billion effort, it was extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the vast majority of homes in the pipeline, sorry about that, or that are being proposed and or built, hitting affordability is going to be the trick here. To try to be aggressive with the number of units, I get it, but it's whether or not people can afford to buy them or afford to get into them is going to be the real measure of whether or not it's successful. We're on Twitter. We're VOCM Open Line. Follow us there. Email address is openline@vocm.com. When we come back, let's have a great show. That means you're in the queue to talk about whatever's on your mind. Do not go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go. Begin this morning on line number 3. Say good morning to the Executive Director at the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities. That's Nancy Reid. Good morning, Nancy. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Good morning.
Great to be here today.
Happy to do it.
Thank you. I'm encouraged and thrilled, I guess, by the question of the day today. So even though I'm running late to get into some meetings, I really wanted to get on Open Line this morning and start the day that way. Just want to speak to the question of the day, if I could. And it is, and I'm sorry, I got to pull it up on my screen again, so I'm quoting it appropriately. But it states, should the province establish a standalone disabilities advocate? And many of your listeners have heard me speak, and others in our community, about the need for a disability advocate for some time. And we stand by that, of course. I stand by that very clearly. We need a disabilities advocate. We are 30+% of our population, and as you said in the preamble, it's obvious that representation needs to be made. But I really appreciate in the question it states a standalone disabilities advocate, and I want to express the importance of that to our community. In 2023, there was a review of the statutory offices of the House of Assembly, and in that review, there was a recommendation made that the position of the seniors advocate should be reconsidered or reconceived to consider, and I'm quoting the recommendation in that space, reconceived to focus on those who are unable to advocate for themselves due to age, health, or disability. The recommendations further states that the office should be renamed as the Office of the Seniors and Complex Needs Advocate. From the community level, from the coalition level, we are very much opposed to that combining of, or to the change of the seniors advocate to bring in persons with what they're calling complex needs. For one, we are persons with disabilities, and we are not necessarily complex needs. We face complex barriers in the environment every day. But the reality is that our population must have a disability advocate that is dedicated to the needs and the concerns and systemic barriers that we face as persons with disabilities. The seniors advocate is a very important role, and Susan Walsh in that role does some great work as a really important office. And it's full, it's very active, it's very busy. But the disability advocate needs to be created to stand alone and to respond to persons with disabilities who may or may not be seniors and may or may not have similar needs as seniors. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to respond to the question today. but really want to express that to your listening audience.
It seemed like a very ham-fisted way to approach a very complicated and important issue, to so-called blend into the seniors advocates position, people with disabilities, people with complex needs, because not every senior is in that envelope and vice versa. It's too important, and there's too many people being represented in the disabled community to do anything but, in my personal opinion, to do anything but appoint the disabilities advocate, staff up that office, maybe even consider changing the mandate from broad stroke advocacy work to being able to be the champion for individual cases. I know that might require more staff and more resources, but the overlaps between one person's needs is distinctly going to be involved with other people who might not be the person that advocate is championing by name, but it will have the exact same impact for other individuals. So I just think that it's high time, because again, the reminder is important here. We're talking about a third of the population. And at some point into the future, even if you're not disabled today, you may be into the future. And so consequently, that representative might be your representative before long.
Mm-hmm. And well said, Patty, and we say that often. The reality is many of us who are persons with disabilities, myself included, aren't born with disabilities. Many of us acquire disabilities for any number of reasons, and we, again, know that we are an aging population. And listen, it's a privilege to grow older. It's a privilege to become a senior. It's a privilege to be an older adult. But with that often comes different abilities or changes and disabilities included in that space. But it also can come from injury, from illness, from any number of reasons. And so any of us could be a person with disabilities at any moment. It's not a bad thing, but there are issues, there are systemic barriers, things that happen with systems, with policies, with programs in our province every day that make things difficult for persons with disabilities. And I believe that we need a disability advocate to address that in a very open and transparent way. We need this position created. This position has been promised in mandate letters since 2020. Previous to that, it was recommendations from the Provincial Advisory Council for the inclusion of persons with disabilities that sent those recommendations to the minister responsible. And that's been, I want to say 15 years now in going. Maybe not, I'm not sure, but certainly since, I don't know, for some time. And we need to see action on this file. I'm really hopeful now, with Minister Corbett in place as the minister responsible for for persons with disabilities, that we'll be able to have really productive conversations. And we actually at the Coalition have a meeting scheduled with him next week, and we're really hopeful about opportunities to go forward in that.
Yeah, one of the questions he was asked about yesterday is funding for children with a disability to be able to attend a summer camp, for instance, and the amount of money that's there for their support worker. Just a personal note, and I learned this lesson, and I'm picking up on something you said just a minute ago. You said at some point in the future, anybody listening to the program might find themselves as being disabled in some form or fashion. And you said, and that's not a bad thing, because I learned the hard way years ago, and had to remind myself this morning, saying that, sometime you may indeed find yourself disabled. And years ago, I would have used the word unfortunately. And people like yourself told me why that's not the right way to look at it, because it's not. People with disabilities, with the appropriate supports and accessibility issues being addressed, and things like universal design and all the rest, can live a life every bit as good, as rich as me or anyone else who is not currently disabled. So I learned that lesson the hard way, and I'm glad someone taught it to me.
And I appreciate that, Patty, but it's so right. I acquired my disability in my early 30s. I've been about 20 years living this way now, and I'm very comfortable, happy, productive in my life. Sure, I face barriers every day, but the barriers I face are not within me. They're within the environment and the systems that I face. I am, an individual who can advocate for myself and overcome some of those barriers. Some of them are still barriers to me. I should, because of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because of the accessibility legislation in this province, I should be able to go into the environment, go to all these public spaces, and have access with it equally as everyone else. The story about the student in Corner Brook is another reminder. You can acquire, injury or illness that creates these barriers occasionally for temporary purpose. But if that particular school, as you said, were universally designed, were available to the greatest number of people, there wouldn't be a story today, in our media about that student in Corner Brook who is facing these barriers, and the family involved would not have opened their eyes to the reality that so many people face on a daily basis in this province. We need a disability advocate to really speak to some of those large issues, and again, to look at some of the individuals in that space to get an understanding of the real experience of people with disabilities in our province, and to see how many of those individuals are facing similar barriers when it comes to need for long-term care versus being able to age and live and be supported in their home environments. We need to think about, the education system and inclusive education and what that really is all about. Not the facade that we see so often around that, but what we need to understand is how students with disabilities are actually deserving and need to be in educational settings with their peers, and how we do that in a way that is respectful and available to the greatest number of people. I believe that a disability advocate could speak to all of these issues and many more, but that person must have the capacity to investigate and not just consider opportunities for doing things differently. The person needs to be able to really get in there and figure out what's happening and figure out ways that we can make change. And I will also say, if I could, that we believe that the importance of that role being filled by an individual with lived experience with disability, someone who has an understanding of what the disability community is all about. Many of us, who acquire disability realize that in our previous life, as I often call it, we really knew nothing about how people with disabilities live and what the barriers they experience are. So really important that whoever, finally gets into this role is somebody with that type of a lens, who has an understanding of what it really means to be a person with a disability and the broad spectrum of what that represents.
Last one for me is, part of the issue may indeed be pretty fundamental in that when people say disability, I think a lot of minds immediately go towards whether or not you have a mobility issue, when in fact we could be talking about people who are neurodivergent. We could be talking about a broad scope of things beyond folks who are using a cane or in a wheelchair or something like. But I think a lot of the general public thinks disability and automatically thinks mobility, when it can be much different than that for different people who are indeed disabled in some form and need some level of support. And it's not a one-size-fits-all here, which I think complicates the concept for politicians and the general public alike. I'll give you the final thoughts, Nancy, before we say goodbye.
And I really appreciate those comments, Patty, because it's true. Disability is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It is not about a wheelchair or a device. It's about the spectrum of humanity, who are persons who encounter barriers in the environment that are based on something within themselves. And you're right, it could be our neurodivergent community, it could be persons with physical mobility disabilities, with sensory disabilities, disabilities related to mental health, anxiety, different social anxiety especially is very something we hear about often. But those are all under the umbrella of disability. And there's no shame associated with any of those issues or factors or realities. They're simply a part of a person's life. And a person could have multiple types of disability. The intersectionality of that is so real. And often, for instance, a person might have disabilities, say a physical mobility disability, and face so many barriers and systemic barriers that it really impacts their mental health. And so then disabilities related to mental health, rise and become something else that a person has to deal with. It's really it's really interesting and incredible, but we're at a point right now, I believe, in this journey where there's a recognition of the realities of need for persons with disabilities, and I really believe that this is the time to create that disability advocate position in a real, meaningful way.
Appreciate the time, Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. It's Nancy Reid, the Executive Director at CADNL, which of course Coalition of Persons with Disabilities. Let's take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Say good morning to the Provincial Chair of the Canadian Federation of Students. That's Nicholas Keogh. And good morning, Nicholas. You're on the air.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So a group yesterday, including yourself, I'm pretty sure, gathered at the Signal Hill campus of Memorial University talking about the tuition freeze, trying to get a conversation going with the Board of Regents. What happened?
Yeah, so actually not just at the Signal Hill campus. We also had some students protesting at the Grenfell campus, and we also had some students from the Marine Institute who were in class on a boat in Holyrood who also took their signs and joined our campaign. We have been advocating for the last number of weeks, or the last number of years, for a tuition reduction, but the last number of weeks since the provincial budget came out, which offered a pause for the first time since 2022 on cuts to the tuition offset grant, which is a separate grant from Memorial's main operating grant. It's a separate grant that was $68.4 million. It's been cut every year. Now it's not being cut for this year. And so we believe that it's because of a lot of student advocacy, and we think that it's only right that the Board of Regents should pause tuition increases this year as a result of that. I think it makes sense. I think that money that Memorial is saving from the government not cutting the tuition offset grant should be going directly towards tuition. And so we wanted to make sure that students were present at the Board of Regents meeting so that the Board of Regents knows that we're watching for this decision.
So, has the university said that, given the government's decision to pause the cuts to the offset grant, that the board and or leadership at MUN has said that that's not going to directly relate to tuition hikes into the future? Because they kind of feel like one and the same to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that it would be obvious that it would mean a at least reduction of the planned 4% increase to tuition this year, but it doesn't seem like it at first, at least. I spoke with Dr. Jennifer Lokash, who's the current president of MUN, and it really did seem like they were weighing options between focusing on putting money into student recruitment, things like that, which we felt was not at all appropriate given the fact that the grant is called the tuition offset grant and was directly responsible for maintaining the tuition freeze from 1999 to 2022. It seems like if that grant is not going to be cut this year, then tuition should not be increased 4% this year. But we're kind of seeing mixed messaging from Memorial on this, so that's why we really wanted to have a presence at the meeting to make sure that at least the board members know that students want this freeze, and also that we're watching, we're waiting with anticipation.
There's some historical context that could be drawn upon here too, because let's remember that the campus renewal fee is for one specific purpose, and that's for renewing campus, preventative maintenance and otherwise, and some of that money got refunded elsewhere, so I guess that gives you a case to lean in on.
Absolutely. We've been saying that as well, because it is really important that I think Memorial uses the money given by government, and they have made statements recently saying that, well, they didn't get a directive from government where to use the money. But I think that is ridiculous, to be honest, because if it's called the tuition offset grant, I don't see what else you would use it for besides tuition offset. And if they don't use it for tuition offset, I just can't see that looking good for Memorial administration in terms of trying to prove to the province that they're financially responsible. I think we have been trying to give them a bone. Students have been trying to give them a bone this year to prove to the province that they can do the right thing with the money that they get. And if they don't do this, I just don't know. I think it'll be tough for students to continue to advocate for them.
There's going to be some form of pain coming, whether it be based on decisions made in the president's office and the new incoming president, Dr. Morrison, or wherever it lands. Because if you add up costs of operation, whether it be programs or courses that are shelved or paused, or staff to be laid off or fired, or tuition or fees to be hiked, something is coming in some form or fashion. I mean, it's not just about Dr. Morrison's leadership at Sheridan College, it's just about the fiscal reality. So whether that requires enhanced government involvement and or the understanding that pain has to be shared equitably across, because something's got to change. It's completely unsustainable into the future to operate at the current economic realities at MUN.
I would agree. I think obviously MUN students are still advocating for increased funding from government, and we got a little bit of that this year. But I do think that, if funding does remain the same from government as it is this year, then absolutely there's going to be tough decisions that have to be made. I just think that if government is giving money to the university under the veil of a tuition offset grant, it does pretty clearly state where that money should go. And while I'm not in favor of any cuts to programs or anything like that, I do think that in this case, MUN is really being given an opportunity to win some favor with students. And yeah, I'm just a bit concerned if they don't take that.
Appreciate the time this morning, Nicholas. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we know we're going to hear from candidates interested in running in municipal elections across the province. One such candidate is in the queue right now. And also another caller here, Paul Walsh, friend of ours from the Autism Society, also talked about the need for disability advocate. And then you. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 1. Greg Smith, you're on the air.
Hi, good morning, Patty.
Good morning.
This is probably the worst kept secret. I'm returning to my roots. I'm going to be running in the Ward 2 for the upcoming St. John's municipal election. So for me, I spent an overwhelming majority of my life in the ward, and I think that I have the real life experience to add as a city councillor to Ward 2.
Take this as is intended. So you've ran in the past unsuccessfully. Yeah. So what changes now with the Greg Smith candidate of the last election versus this one? Well, whether it be lessons learned or issues that need better attention on the hustings?
100%. So, yeah, it's no secret I've ran for City Hall here a couple of times. I am passionate about being at the decision-making table. I think that my voice matters down there, and I know that I could represent the people of the ward incredibly well, especially with the life experience that I have. So for me, obviously, it's really getting out the vote, hopefully connecting with the voters over the next couple of months. But I know for a fact that we're on the right track, from talking to business owners, talking to people in the community, the issues that I've lived, whether it is most of my life as a pedestrian or a public transit user, advocating for that, someone that was raised in social housing and social assistance and now is a working class person who rents. We have a housing crisis. We need to make sure that we have more affordable housing across the province and in its municipalities, and that we are more dense. I've seen, crime in my community. I grew up in inner city St. John's, so I know for a fact that public safety matters, whether it is, from accessibility on your streets to watching crime around you and preventing that and making sure that the most vulnerable are taken care of. And we collaborate better with the RNC and multi-levels of government, neighborhood associations. So I know for a fact that we're on the right track, when it comes to policy and substance. And hopefully over the next few months, Patty, I get to show the voters of Ward 2 and the taxpayers that I should be their voice.
What's the municipality's role on crime? Because inevitably you need law enforcement to deal with crime, whether or not we're talking cultural shifts and or new rules for landlords, which I think can be very problematic when we talk about the drug trade. So what exactly is the municipal councillor's role in crime and prevention of?
Well, first and foremost, I'm going to say that I think that all crime needs to be, it needs to be reported. And I don't think all of it is. I think people kind of post about it on Facebook. They don't call all the time. It needs to be reported. If there's something suspicious, if there's crime happening, you need to report it first and foremost. But I think that, what we need to do as a municipality is make sure that we're working with the neighborhood associations, working better with the RNC, whether it's foot patrol in our downtown core. I know some people don't feel safe down there all the time. Myself personally, I was physically assaulted on George Street years ago. So we need to work better with different levels of government to make sure the funding is there, that we have policing in areas that it matters, to have people who are there to take care of the most vulnerable appropriately. And I think it's a big partnership. That's really what it is. We need to partner with non-for-profits, like Thrive and Choices, to make sure that there's people on there in the street reach. We need to make sure that businesses are reporting stuff and that there's cameras around. I think CCTV is another big one too. We're not really leaning into as much, is that if there is presence of I'm being watched, you're going to see less crime. So I think that I think foot patrol, cameras, etc., that can alleviate some of the downtown issue, and having healthy and strong neighborhood associations can kind of help you as well too. They can kind of have the back for one another.
I appreciate the time this morning, Greg. Thanks for calling the program, and good luck out there.
Thank you so much. And over the next few months, I look forward to meeting you on the doors and meeting you at different events throughout the city. And if you have anything, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Greg. Good luck.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, let's keep going here. Let's go to line number 4. Paul Walsh, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Very good. Thank you, sir. I'm calling this morning, and you identified me as the CEO of the Autism Society, which is true, but I'm really calling as a person who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at birth and has lived a life understanding the barriers of persons with disabilities, physical disabilities in my cases, but as my work over the last 5 years has been understanding the breadth of disability. And I'm calling in support of my dear friend and incredible advocate, Nancy Reed, in regard to the need for the disability advocate. And Patty, I'm looking at a letter dated April 15th, 2021, and this is the mandate letter then Premier Fury sent to the Minister of Children, Seniors and Social Development. And I quote, "Ensure that all policy and legislative work is grounded in the principle of nothing about us without us. Please continue to work to establish an advocate for persons with disabilities in Newfoundland and Labrador." So that's a commitment made over 4 years ago. And when we talk about nothing about us without us, something I believe in dearly, it's posted on the wall outside my office. That's not consultation. That's, what's your opinion. That's persons with disabilities, persons with lived experience of all disabilities being at the table and making the decisions. And the disability advocate is a big part of that. And Nancy made such an important point when she said that advocate has to have investigative powers, and something the seniors advocate doesn't have in this province, has to have lived experience, and has to address the challenges that are in our system today, the erosion of inclusive education, the lack of access to services, especially diagnostic services. If I talk about the community I have the pleasure to serve every day, all of the barriers, even the unconscious barriers, people are still putting their recycling on the sidewalk, making, for 3 or 4 hours, a sidewalk is totally inaccessible to somebody who is wheeling down the street. And the terminologies, complex needs, special needs. These are all labels that minimize people, that pathologize people, that make people somehow less in our society. Everybody has needs. What a disability advocate will help us do is move forward with the social justice to ensure equity in terms of delivery of needs for that 31% of the population who identify as disabled.
Interesting point about where you place recycling and what have you. I could be wrong, but I like to think that many of those behaviors or actions are simply based on not understanding the implication, as opposed to willfully and purposefully blocking access.
I agree.
Right? So, and that's where these conversations, I think, can be most helpful. At the political and policy level, of course, that's above my pay grade, but just these little friendly, helpful, gentle reminders that your actions have consequences, to understand what the rest of the community looks like and the supports and the access points or whatever it is that they need, to consider that as you go about your day-to-day business. It won't take away from your ability to live. It won't take away from your so-called freedoms. It won't take away from your opportunities in this world. But understanding what it means for someone else, is, even if you just talk about it in the broad strokes of empathy and or understanding, I think it can be helpful. I think it'll make an appreciable difference even before we dig into the brass tacks of policy.
Absolutely, Betty. It would make a huge difference if we all just stop and think, is my action causing an inconvenience, a challenge, a barrier for someone else?
Yeah, because if I put the recycling bag in the easement versus the sidewalk, it didn't compromise my ability to get my recycling picked up, but it's a small thing, but it can be a very big thing to someone whose just ability to go up or down the street is impeded.
Absolutely. Sir, I would like to mention one other thing.
Sure.
I'd like to call out the 31% of us who identify as disabled in this province and say very simply that one action we can take that would make a difference is collectively actioning our intention politically. And what I mean by that is vote. Make this an election issue. Make it an issue that if we were promised, and I've got the letter here right here, promised a disability advocate, something a lot of other provinces have, that it's an election issue. It's in the face of every candidate who comes to the door, and we have it in writing what their position is. We can only action things when we work collectively and together.
Yeah, and to make your point and Nancy's point a little further, is it might not be you today, but it might be you tomorrow.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, we all have needs, whatever they may be, different from person to person and life circumstance and socioeconomic issues and all the rest of it. But it could be you that is calling that disabilities advocate office tomorrow, next year, a decade from now. So I just think it's the broad stroke importance is right there for us all to see. And that's probably poor choice of words. So when I mentioned neurodivergent and mobility issues, I quickly got a couple of emails that saying you're leaving out some key segments of society. That's not my intention, whether it be folks who are blind or deaf or have cognitive issues, because I tried to say it's an extremely broad segment of society, so I'm not leaving anybody out on purpose.
No, and I mean, there is a thing called a disability pride flag that covers the 5 areas of disability, including invisible disabilities, psychiatric disabilities, sensory disabilities, neurodivergence, and physical disabilities. And we're talking about all of that. We're talking about a broad 1/3 of society in this province. And the disability advocate would work for all of those folks. And more importantly, though, all of those folks would become equal citizens as we drop barriers and make this province barrier-free, which our province has committed to. And really important that the actions have to follow the words.
100%, Paul. Always nice to speak with you. Anything else you'd like to say this morning?
No, sir. I always put a plug in. As you know, our Embracing Neurodiversity conference is this coming Wednesday. A couple of seats left. Amazing speaker. We're talking about education. Dr. Eliza Alcorn from the UK, talking about education and the role of neurodiversity, appropriate role of neurodiversity in the education system, as well as talk on neurodiversity in the arts and the role of occupational therapy. It's at the Signal Hill campus of Memorial University. Our 4th one, which is amazing to me, and really excited for that.
Hope it's a roaring success, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Always great to speak with you.
My pleasure, Paul. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, there you go. I have no idea what's going on in the queue, but I'm going to flick the numbers out there just because. If you're in and around town, 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. We're taking a break, and then we're coming back. Welcome back to the show. Well, we all know that Parliament has not reopened for the next sitting, and there will not be a budget delivered before the summer, which is problematic on a variety of fronts, regardless of the party you support. But one of the key items that we don't have full understanding of, but we're talking about housing. Let's just break down some of the numbers here. There's a group called the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, and they're a policy organization, research group. They say the number of unhoused people in the country is around 235,000. But Stats Canada paints a very different picture. Stats Canada says folks who have experienced homelessness in the past year, in their lifetime, at some point, is about 1.69 million people. Also, according to Stats Canada, 8.56 million Canadians, and that's slightly more than 1 in 5 people, are living in unaffordable housing. And again, the definition that everybody used on that front is 30% or more of your before-tax income on shelter. So what is the Prime Minister and the Liberal government proposing? And of course, it's a minority parliament. Key areas they focus in on, whether it be with taxes itself and or streamlining approvals, development fees that are paid to municipalities. There's a lot in it. Let's get into some. Oh, and of course, also covers financing. Breaking it down a little bit further. So talking about needing to build some 500,000 homes, new homes, a year, which is double the current pace in this country. So not going to be easy. And I did mention off the top that they're talking about building affordable housing, including on public lands, but creating a new Crown corporation to do it, called Build Canada Homes. Understanding and recognizing that it is at crisis levels in the country is, of course, important. Sometimes seems to me a little bit of a cockamamie approach to create yet another level of bureaucracy to accomplish what we're talking about here, and in this case, 500,000 homes per year. Then they talk about some of the GST breaks. The GST current break that they're talking about, encouraging provinces to get on coupling that with their own HST breaks, but it's only on the purchase of new homes at $1 million or less, and it's only for first-time buyers. Now, I do think that any strategy that gins up the demand side, when what we have is a supply side problem, is, of course, an olive branch or political pandering to people looking to buy a home. But if we're going to have any GST break on buying a home $1 million or less, then if we're talking about affordability, should that not be every homeowner or every person looking to buy a new home? Probably an important part of the conversation. Then, because as the industry points out, the bureaucracy of Build Canada Homes is, I don't think we need more builders. We need more people to build homes, but that doesn't mean a government agency. And then you talk about development fees. So they will try to push municipalities to waive development fees, but that only means that it's going to be incumbent on the federal government itself to replenish those lost funds. Development fees on top of property taxes is a huge revenue stream for municipalities, especially the big ones. So if that's going to be a move into the future, the federal government is simply going to have to pay that money themselves, which, again, a reminder, the federal government doesn't have any money. It's all our money. So that. Then they talk about incentives for investors, for developers. That seems to have worked pretty well into the past, because the country stopped building homes that were for rent and or affordable homes as long ago as the late 1980s. So incentive for investors, people will think automatically that putting more money into the hands of developers who, by and large, are not struggling to make ends meet, or by and large are not struggling to make a buck, but they're the folks that are going to build. And the only way that incentive is going to work is if we can figure out a way that cost per square foot actually meets that affordability target. That has been the trick here. People point to Mark Carney's role as the past chair of Brookfield Assets and the fact that they're in the modular home business. But in the world of building affordable homes, that's going to be part of the stream. No doubt about it. Tiny homes, modular homes, multi-unit buildings, and there's already some tax breaks associated with that. That's going to be part of it. Because if we think we're going to build all these homes in the traditional single detached home, we're absolutely kidding ourselves. So there's some certain upside, I think, to the current approach being taken by the federal government. How it gets implemented, I really don't know. And then you talk about tax incentives for investors. This used to be something. Back in the 70s, I can't remember exactly what it was cost, but it was a multi-unit rental allowance or subsidy or whatever they called it at the time. And the result was pretty positive. Built hundreds of thousands of units. And of course, the key inside of that was whether or not people could afford to live in them. So that is happening. The criticisms that will be laid at the feet of the new federal housing minister, the former mayor of Vancouver, Gregor Robertson, are going to be sharp. Of course, the Vancouver market is one of the most overheated markets in the country. They also have a supply problem. Now, if you hear the news this morning, the fact that we've built so many condos versus building rentals, the condo market is starting to correct itself. Over 10% in Vancouver, just about 10% in Toronto, and all of those chickens are coming home to roost. That doesn't curb or solve anything. It's very much a buyer's market in those big centres, whereas it's a seller's market in and around here, which also speaks directly to the affordability issue. I know of very specific examples in the last week or so where homes were sold way over list. So how many people out there have looked at dozens of homes with their realtor, have put in multiple bids just to be outbid and by wide margins? Homes that are on the market for $480, selling for $550, not uncommon. So while we build into the future, that can't be it. That can't be the outcome, regardless of the strategy employed by one government or another. Let's see here. Recent affordability report from Rate Hub, which uses current real estate data, mortgage rates, When we talk about affordability, if you have an income of $87,000 in St. John's, you're deemed to be eligible to buy or able to buy affordable housing, which is 30% of your before-tax income. Same thing applies to Fredericton, Winnipeg, Regina, but not in any other cities, big cities in the country. Get a load of this. To get into an affordable unit in Vancouver, it takes an income of $240,000. Way out of reach for so many people in that city. Calgary, $125,000, $217,000 in Toronto, $122,500 in Montreal, and about $120,000 in Halifax. Pretty big difference between Halifax and St. John's. $87,000 here, $120,000 in Halifax to get into a home with 30% or less of your before-tax income. So the strategy is pretty big. There's 4 key focus areas. Will it be successful remains to be seen. But people bought into it. And you can only hope that it has the desired outcomes, but it is always going to boil back down to whether or not we talk about development fees for municipalities, incentives for investors. It's going to boil back down to if it's going to be as good as people need or want it to be, it's going to have to hit the affordability target. If you ask a home builder today, and let's just say someone makes $87,000, to build a new home, unless it's modular or tiny, the cost per square foot does not allow for that unit. Even if we talk about traditional 1,000 square feet on the main, to try to get into one of these homes is going to be the trickiest piece of business in any government's plan, provincially, municipally, or federally, for the housing issue to be addressed as intended. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about tobacco, and then we're speaking with you. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 1. Charlie, you're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy.
Morning.
Paddy, just a quick discussion on joy. There's a guy, Stephen Patro, he wrote The Joy You Make. Thomas Aquinas said one time, man cannot live without joy. I guess that goes along with man cannot live by bread alone. And one more, without hope, light or joy, we're but in the dark, we're lost in the dark, circling the drain. But he talked about the different kinds of joy. There can be positive joy and negative joy. For instance, a walk in a quiet nature park and that he called that serene joy, right? And those attending church can experience religious joy. And there's joy in many other ways. There's joy in eating, if you like cooking and eating as well. There's joy in drinking, even in boozing and drugs. And there's joy in looking at the downfalls of others, Schadenfreude, I think they call it, and joy in experiencing like Jacob Lewis on winning the Canadian Idol. Anyway, his basic lesson is to have joy in your life is totally necessary. Otherwise, you are circling the drain, ready to go down. I don't know if you want to comment or not.
Well, for some, it comes naturally. For others, you have to work for it. And I'm probably in the latter category. I mean, I've got lots of good things going on in my world where I can easily find joy. But I also, for instance, do something like this for a living, which makes it sometimes I think I have to try to work for it. But it's out there, and it's out there to be had. I find little easy ways for myself to find a bit of joy, to kind of distract myself from all the things I hear and see. Like, for instance, a bit of sports, my new puppy, music, my family, and there's lots of things out there that if you dwell on them, the more you dwell, the hyper focus that you give to things that are negative in your world, the harder it's going to be to come by even the slightest modicum of joy.
Yeah, you sort of got to get out of your mind.
Absolutely.
He talked about a recipe, connection to others, helping others, gratitude, kindness, staying active. And anyway, I'll leave that one at that.
Okay.
The Newfoundland government using tobacco money that they may or may not get to reduce their deficit. What did you think of that?
I've spoken to it many times. Look, if it's technically ethical and appropriate accounting, I can live with that. And from the people I speak to, both accountants and lawyers, they say absolutely. There's no reason they can't do it. But some of the exaggerations offered is that the government is obliged by law to record the revenue. That's absolutely true. But you're not obliged to account for the revenue until you get the revenue. You don't have to account for things that are aspirational and attached with big ifs and all the rest of it. So this was a political play, no more, no less. And if the government wanted to use the money the way they did this year, for me, again, if I was giving advice, which I'm not, to them, I'd say, look, go to the Auditor General, and whether or not Denise Hanrahan says yay or nay to it, just tell people what you're doing. Because if someone says, well, the deficit is $375, which it technically is, but it's also because of $520 million from a court compensation settlement. So tell us, put it in the budget speech, be upfront, and people, I think, will live with it. But the fact of the matter is, they kind of played the end around. We found out the hard way, and so now there's big questions, and there needn't be big questions.
Well, if we're not getting the money, we're only getting a small portion of it. It seems to me very misleading. All you can apply really to this year's is the money they're receiving this year. Money down the road that we may or may not get. To me, that's total bogus.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue that point at all. Now, there are circumstances in the past where similar logic has been applied to accounting. So, for instance, 2019, when there was amendments to the Atlantic Accord, the difference there is that we used a lot of the money up front, but the payments were guaranteed by the Government of Canada. That's a big difference, and guaranteed by Big Tobacco, which may or may not be around in the 30 years from now for which their final payments are due. I know 40% is due up front, and we can bank and bet on that, but the rest of it comes with that most consequential two-letter word in the English language, which is if. And I think it's not only risky business, but it's a bit footloose and fancy-free with declaring that the deficit has been under control. All the while, borrowed $4.1 billion, all the while put another $108 million into the future fund, all of which, when you wrap it up and try to lay bare, it paints a very different picture than you hear in, say, for instance, the budget speech itself.
Well, to me, it's disingenuous. It's misleading for a government to do that. We're still paying the interest. It wasn't nearly as low deficit as we were led to believe. It's playing tricks on the voters. It's one reason why people get cynical about government and their pronouncements, and then they get up and try to defend it as if it's a normal practice and so on, and we didn't do anything. I don't think Buddy was too wrong about cooking the books, because it was a deliberate effort to deceive us regarding the real deficit. But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'll comment on cooking the books. I think, generally speaking, when someone hears that kind of insinuates, and I'm not trying to put words or thoughts in Lynn Paddock's mind or mouth, but that really sounds like someone has committed a crime. When you cook the books and you're taken to task by law enforcement and the courts, that's an actual different adjudication than what we're talking about here. They can indeed do what they did. The problem is, for me, is the way they went about it. Like, again, I have no role or reason to consult or to offer strategy and advice to any level of government or any individual, whether it be elected or otherwise. But folks will indeed usually live with the issue if you're told up front. It's just like if you get an answer that you didn't want but you got an answer, that's better than deafening silence. Same thing on this front. If we were told, here's the consequences, here's how it's being handled in other provinces, this is why we're doing what we're doing, I think it would be a very short-lived story. And now, because of the way it was done, it will not be short-lived, and it will absolutely be arrows in the quiver of the Tories and the campaign trail, for sure.
I would hope that they would use it. They've been in too long. I think we need a change. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to do was recommend a book and tell an anecdote. The book is called Lucky Loser by Susan Craig and Russ Butner, two New York Times journalists. You're probably familiar with the book. It's on how a guy like Trump gets his beginnings and so on. And the section I'm reading now is on his father, what happened there. And I can understand where the guy is coming from now. That guy, his father earned hundreds of millions of dollars after World War II when they wanted housing. Housing was short for veterans, and they had a federal government program that they milked. They screwed people out of money. They paid off people for contracts. You name it, they did it. He was even brought before a committee, his father Fred, and I don't think he was finally charged. But anyway, he was practicing. Trump learned at the hands of his father how to screw the system. And just one little story. He was very. He'd drive around in these big vehicles. They had fancy houses and so on, but he would skin someone for a cent. He had a driver come, a truck driver, to deliver some kind of piece of furniture. He was going to pay them $5. That was okay, I suppose, at that point. When Buddy got there, the furniture was much, much bigger, and he asked him if he'd pay more, maybe a couple of dollars more. And Fred Trump told him no, he just wasn't going to do that. And they got into an argument, and one of Fred Trump's friends came along and witnessed what was happening. And so the driver finally said, F it, give me the $5 and I'll take your bloody sofa, whatever it was. So when he drove off, the friend said to Fred, you know, he was only asking a few more dollars. You think you could have helped the guy out? And Fred Trump said, it wasn't about the dollars. It was about the losing. Have you heard that before?
I have, yep.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess I'll leave it at that. Oh, yeah, one little, can I make one more little point?
Quickly.
We're talking about fresh water around the world. You know, of course, what an aquifer is, underground fresh water.
I do.
It supplies about 1/3 of the needs of the world. Aquifers around the world, especially in places, dry places like the States and that, these are being depleted at an alarming rate. And cities are being affected already. When the water is taken out, not only don't we have it for use for agricultural needs and for urban needs, the ground tends to sink. You get subsidence in those areas. But it's just one more example of how we're drawing on the Earth's resources to hurt future generations because we want it now. But the aquifer story hasn't been told very much, but it's a very, very important story, and what's happening is going to result at some point in a catastrophe for certain areas who depend on these aquifers. I'll leave it at that.
There's a lot to that. There's the issue regarding precipitation patterns, which have changed dramatically. There's what they call overpumping. So that would be agriculture, of which what we need, but there's ways to grow with substantially less water. I know that I appreciate an almond, but I think the world could do without almonds if we push came to shove and we talk about the amount of water required. I'm going to leave it there too, but I want to read you something that sounds pretty insightful from a listener named Brian. And this is about your opening comments regarding joy. He says, and this isn't a point that you or I made, but I think it's worth reading. I like to distinguish between joy and happiness. For me, I consider happiness a temporary feeling, while joy is a form of pleasant contentment that is not temporary and can exist in some deep sense, even when suffering and pain are apparent. I think that's a pretty wise thing to say, because he's absolutely right. I can be happy when my team scored a goal, but the joy comes in other forms that are more long-lasting and really bleeds into, the concept of joy, because he's 100% right. I can be happy one moment, sad the next, but I can still have that back in my mind go-to bit of joy that I can lean on. So I really like what he wrote there. Appreciate the time, Charlie. Thanks for the call.
Okay, you're welcome.
All
Thank
the best.
you, buddy.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
When we come back, Ted's here to talk housing. Don't go away. Welcome back. Oh, boy. I knew this was going to happen because it happens every time when I mentioned something like water use in agriculture, because, of course, you do need water for most crops, but it's almonds in particular that I lean in on. Someone's saying, what are you talking about? What's the big deal with almonds? Well, here's some numbers to consider. I like almonds. I don't mind a bit of almond milk. You know how much water it takes to grow a single almond? Over a gallon. Over a gallon of water to grow one almond. For a cup of almonds, 100 gallons of water. So, it's not like it's outrageous to consider exactly how we use water. And remember, some of the climates with which we grow almonds are those that are suffering the most, with things like Lake Mead drying up, aquifers drying up in a more brisk pace than any time in the last 40 years. So, when I say I'm not so sure almonds are the be-all and end-all when we talk about the need in other areas of life for water, a gallon or more for every single almond grown. Sounds extraordinary to me. Let's keep going. Let's go to line number 2. Ted, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm calling about the bidding wars that are going on in the St. John's area.
Yep.
And one of the possible causes of that. A couple of years ago, the real estate agents changed the form to make a seller's direction now. So what they do is they post a house on a Monday, accept offers up to Thursday, say. So I've seen a house up at a crossroads in St. John's that 18 offers on it. So I'll give you an example. 2 apartment homes in the St. John's area as of April the 25th that were overbid. One on Greenspond Drive that was overbid by $73,300, $40,000, $65,700, $57,000, $40,000, $40,100, $49,600, $51,000. All these houses have been overbid. Same with the townhouses in the St. John's area. And what's going to happen is down the road is people's appraisal values are going to go through the roof, and they're going to wonder why my appraisal values gone up. Because houses are being overbid by this seller's direction that the real estate agents changed on their form, allowing multiple bidders, creating a bidding war.
I understand that point, but an appraisal is only so important. I mean, I think for the property owner, your assessment is more important than your appraisal, and appraisals are just guidelines by and large. Like, I mean, I know of a house that just sold, I should leave the numbers out of it because I'll be telling on someone who I actually know who bought it, but if I pay 70 grand over, there's no real market controls that can be applied there. You can talk about multiple bids and tight timelines for offers to be submitted and what they call as the bully offer and things like that, but inevitably, regardless of assessment, appraisal, rules, policies, regulations, my home is worth exactly what someone's willing to pay for it.
Yeah, but that's not, the appraisals are going to go back, when they go do their appraisals down the road, the people who determine the appraisal for the property values, they're going to go back and look at all these previous sellings in the last year and
You're
say,
right.
how much your home go for. They don't know how much your home go for until it's actually sold, but they know what a similar home went for, and if all the values are up, the sales are up major, they're going to say your home is worth $50,000 more than you may get on the market, and your property tax is going to go up. 100%.
Yeah, appraisals don't have to follow assessments necessarily, but I totally get your point. But for instance, in the world of comps, and that's something that real estate agents will talk about all the time. Well, the house down the street that's very similar to yours was on the market for $379 and went for $405 or whatever. They'll say that all the time. But if I'm the person who's buying, I'm much more inclined to lean in on the $375, the $379 than the $405 for a variety of reasons. So I don't try to overpay because I think I'm going to get outbid every single time. But you're not wrong. But by the time what you paint as a clear picture, by the time we see the ebb and the flow of buyer versus seller's markets, it has a funny way of correcting itself. Now, it'll never correct fully downwards like it did either way up, but that does indeed play a role. But you make an interesting point. We will have artificially inflated appraisals of homes. What that means for eventual purchase price, it certainly will influence it up, but will it influence it up to the extent that you talk about 71,000 over ask, 55 over ask, 63 over ask, because that's happening all the time. But I think that has a funny way of correcting itself before too long, especially if they get the supply side issue like we hope they will.
Yeah, if they get it, but if they don't get it, it's creating a bidding war. And if you don't overbid, you have no chance of getting a home. I can tell you right now, I bid on homes, and you had no chance at all getting them unless you overbid. And I can look back right back to January on every house that sold in the St. John's area, what it was listed for and what it sold for, and 99% of them way over asking. And it's going to continue, the bidding war is going to continue as long as that seller's direction is there, as long as they're allowing multiple offers in on the property, because they don't put in the offer to the last minute, a lot of them. They wait for the last minute and see how many options, and then they put in higher and higher and higher offers. So all of a sudden now, you can even see between February and now how much the houses have gone up and how much the offers have gone up on them.
Sure. Now, this is a question, not a statement. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the realtor representing the seller is allowed to say anything beyond the fact there's multiple bids. They can't say there's 7 or 10 or 12. They can't disclose any numbers. So that's why people are just like throwing darts at a dartboard, trying to figure out what bid might be satisfactory. And the bidding wars only take place if a house is in a desired location and is in reasonable condition. But you're 100% not wrong. But if I'm going into a multiple bid situation, I'm flying blind though, right?
I've been in houses that weren't fit, and they had like 15 offers on them because you got investors too, and they do tell you how many offers are in on the house after it closes. They actually send you an email if you bid on it. As the offers come in, right up to closing, they actually send you an email. It comes automatically from the real estate agent who got it listed, and it shows how many offers is in on that house.
So is that after let's say the deadline for bids to be submitted? Is that after that they tell you, or up to?
Then you can get the email.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's not going away anytime soon. That much we know. But, I mean, just look at some of the biggest markets in the country. Vancouver, and I'm talking specifically condos now, they've got a buyer's market. Toronto, buyer's market. St. John's, seller's market. Halifax, seller's market. So it's fascinating to watch the world of that. Last question before I let you go, Ted. In the world of allowing multiple offers, is there actually anything that can be done to stem that? Because that kind of feels like just the way the world works in supply and demand.
Yeah, there's nothing they can do. I want to go back to the old way it was, but they're probably not going to do that unless the government forces them now. But other than that, there's always going to be a bidding war on houses.
Feels like it. Yeah, there's a house in my neighborhood not that long ago, and I've been in the house, and to walk in the kitchen, it was 1979, and it went for 40 grand over ask. And I'm telling you, it needed big six figures to modernize and to update the home, but it went for huge money.
Yeah, that's caused by multiple offers because people realise when you start bidding on something, say, I don't have a chance. If you don't bid over, like the next house that I bid on, if I don't bid way over, I'm never going to get one.
Yeah, and then we're all talking affordability, and that does not scream affordability. I guess the affordability conversation is maybe a little bit more about newly constructed homes, which can be vastly different than what you and I are talking about. So, Ted, you do this as someone who's going to be a landlord down the road, or do you flip them, or are you buying with other investors' money and goals? How does it operate for you?
Landlord down the road. So just living in the house, probably with a basement apartment. Right?
Yeah, fair enough.
Everybody to get one. And you realise that after a couple of months at it, you realise, well, if I don't do that, I'm never going to get a house.
It's worthy of a conversation. I'm glad you made time for the show, Ted.
Perfect. Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye. I mean, it is 100% true. There's homes going, but I guess the summary point is, regardless of public policy and what have you, because even if there's not a multiple offer situation, I can just reject your offer. I could be asking $399.9 for my house. You say putting a bid for $390, and I say no. You can put a bid for foot ask. I can say no. So eventually, even in the buyer-seller's market, ultimately, whatever someone's willing to pay for my house is exactly what it's worth. And that's always going to be the case. Because you'll get a sense as to how many people have come through with the realtor, how active the open house might have been, having real estate agents knock on your door, cold call about, putting your house on the market because you might live in a coveted neighborhood or in a school neighborhood or whatever the case may be. So I'll be able to, I'm not selling my house, but it's worth what someone's willing to pay, I suppose. Let's take a break. When we come back, Nelson's there to talk about wait times. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Nelson, you're on the air.
Today, Patty. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. How about you?
I'm great. I'm calling you in regards to the waiting times that the hospitals are having. I just recently took on May 5th to the hospital, the Science Center person. They ended up that they waited 12 hours and then told to go home because there's nobody there to see them. Then I took her to the Carbonear Hospital and waited there 10 hours. Now, that was twice we went to Carbonear, twice to the Health Science Center, and still never got looked at. It's just terrible the way our healthcare system works and how people got to wait. So then I said, now, how many doctors do you have actually in there to look at people? And I think the response was 1. And I have to say there was at least 200 people in line waiting to see a doctor. I just find that outrageous and terrible.
Me too.
And finally today, I managed to take her to Whitburn to get her looked at. And finally, we got somebody. I find that in the inner cities, you just don't get looked at, even if you're in pain. And they are in pain. When they're in pain, they're in pain. Somebody should have the right to at least look at them and give them some kind of assistance.
Nelson, so when you say we're unable to be seen, is that we're unable to wait whatever extraordinary number of hours to be seen? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
There's people there where they're 15 hours. Now, how long can you sit in a hospital and wait to be looked at? It's just outrageous, the times that people have to spend. I've been in this province, I guess, 14 or 15 years, and in the last 10, I've never seen it decline so much. It just makes me wonder what's going on. I also just want to mention, Patty, the other last week I was in town, and I seen an old man fall to the ground, of course, with a appeared to be a heart attack. Children were around him, teenagers, with their cell phones out, taking pictures of it, thinking it was something that was going on or, curious. Not one of them had the inclination to go over and ask the poor guy what's going on. I don't understand, in our schools, in our public schools, in our high schools, why we're not teaching our children first aid. Make it a criteria that they should have to take that course every year. And upgrade our kids, because I'm sure if one of them children knew first aid, they'd have been over there helping that man. And if they saved that man's life, that would put them probably in the direction to become a doctor. They don't even do that.
We're singing from the same songbook on that one. I've been talking about having first aid as part of the school curriculum for years. It just makes sense. Now, in addition to that, whether it be learning CPR or even just how to care for a wound, control bleeding, if someone's choking, all of these very basic things that if you had the tools in your tool belt, you could indeed save someone's life. But in addition to what you just said about first aid, the fact that you also reported that the first things first is take out their phone to take a picture or a video of the man, that's not a school issue. That's a home issue. I mean, to not be able to instill in our kids that empathy and understanding of some things are more important than your TikTok page, and that man is infinitely more important than any bit of likes or retweets or whatever that you can get. So first things first, put the phone away, get some help, and if you can't provide the help yourself, make sure someone who can is called immediately. That's a learning how to grow up issue, as opposed to what you rightfully point out is the need to teach basic first aid in school.
Well, I sure hope one of our politicians is listening, that they would actually implement that, so that child could at least, growing up, save a life, give him the inspiration to become a doctor, because Lord knows in this province we need doctors. Yeah, and I don't understand why we're so shortcut on them all.
Let me add to it. There are people and there are schools that of their own accord have introduced basic first aid to their students. And I know one guy in particular who he links me on some social media pages when he's doing exactly that. But we can't leave it up to one school, one individual or another. It should just be a formal part of the curriculum. And it needn't consume an entire term or semester or year, because I can go get basic first aid in a couple of days. So let's say we had one period in the cycle for a month. Those kids would be certified in first aid.
Absolutely, sir. I totally agree. I don't understand why it hasn't been put in years ago. It just seems that in the last decade or 12 years, I've watched this province fall to its knees, and nobody seems to really care. We're too busy working. I also want to just mention, Patty, about our elderly people.
Sure.
Like, my God, how do they live on the income that they live on? I tried retiring in 23. I'm 68 years old. I've driven for this country for 50 years, delivering products to them, to the homes and to businesses. My point is, after 50 years, do you think that at least I paid more in income tax in a month than I get on old age pension and CPP? How do you survive on $1,700 a month? You know what I mean? It's absolutely outrageous, and I don't see anybody implementing any kind of an increase for them. It just doesn't make any sense that a person can live on that. But yet I read and I hear that the new immigrants coming to the country get $1,900 a month, plus $1,800 a month for their child, plus housing bonuses, plus food bonuses. How come we're not getting them as old people? We got to go down to the food bank.
It's not necessarily true, what you just said about immigrants. There's a very short time frame when there's any support. Once your paperwork is done and you're in the churn, you're on your own, with other than a very basic, very modest amount of money coming in the door. So some of those stories, I think, just unfortunately paint a very unclear picture about what's actually happening. But to your point about seniors, look, a couple of things. The eligibility for guaranteed income supplement, it's around $29,000 for an individual now. That has to go up. It's been that number for years. Cost of living has changed dramatically. That threshold needs to change. For qualifying for other pots of money, there's not every senior is unable to live on $1,700 a month. If you own your own home and own your own car and you work 35 years for the phone company, that $1,700 complements an already comfortable lifestyle. But if we test it against your means, like most other things in this world, if it's a mean tested increase, whether it be the old age security, increase the threshold for GIS, CPP2, all those things, there's a way to do it without putting money out the door to folks who, quote unquote, don't really need it. Because the folks that really need it all fall inside the exact same eligibility threshold, and it's not working.
Yes, sir, I do agree it's not working. So I had to, I applied for Newfoundland drug program. Now, I'm a diabetic. I've fought cancer. I beat it, and I'm thankful for that. I have neuropathy. I have diabetes. So I applied to the Newfoundland drug program to see if they could help me. They told me that I take Nova Rapid fast insulin, and I also take the slow insulin. They told me that they don't cover slow insulin for me. They don't cover it. I said, well, there's no substitute for it. There's only one. And then when I do get the Nova Rapid, it's not Nova Rapid. It's some second grade insulin that, we probably send to the third world. I really don't know. But it doesn't work for me. So now I'm in it stuck. So I said, well, that's enough now. I said, what I'm going to do is, being as sick as I am, I'm going to have to go back to work, get back in a truck, go back out there and try to make a living to keep myself alive. And that's pretty sad when you can't retire. I guess they'll be hauling me out of a bunk of a truck in the future because I don't see it any other way.
Nelson, would your that variety of insulin, would that be covered by the federal plan? Do you happen to know?
Yes, it is. The Nova Rapid isn't. There's a substitute one. I'm not too sure of the name of it, but you can rest assured it doesn't work as good as the quality of Nova Rapid. Also, there's another insulin that's a slow insulin. There's only one made. They do not cover it. What they tell you is, I'm sorry, we can't cover that. That's not covered. So now we don't even have a slow activating insulin for at nighttime. So in the morning you get up, at least your sugars are at a decent level.
Yeah, the reason I ask, because people still wonder whether or not we're going to formally sign on to the federal plan. I appreciate your time and your concerns this morning, Nelson. Thanks for calling.
Thank you, Patty, and have a good day, sir.
You too. All the best. Bye-bye. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, Kimberly wants to throw out a bouquet to the council out in Arbor Grace. Jim wants to talk cost of living, and then we're going to talk with Terry Martin, Director of Fund Development at the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association, NL Chapter. And then we're speaking with you. Don't go away.
You're listening to a rebroadcast of VOCM Open Line. Have your say by calling 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626 and listen live weekday mornings at 9 a.m.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 4. Jim, you're on the air.
How you doing, Patty?
Not too bad, Jim. Got to put you on hold. We got a shagged up phone line. Let's go to line 7 and say good morning to the Director of Fund Development at the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association of Newfoundland and Labrador. It's Terry Martin. Terry, you're on the air.
Yeah, thank you, Patty, and good morning to you, and I appreciate the time. And you got another great show going.
Thanks, Terry.
Okay, so just to let you know, the 50/50 Ultimate Lottery that we have running right now, the deadline to buy tickets on it is midnight tonight. And right now we're over $294,000 jackpot, so the winner's going to take half of that. And, it's a great campaign. So, taking away $150,000 is a great way to do it to help help the community, people with hearing loss, and help yourself as well.
It's a big prize, 100%. Every now and then when we go down this path, I do think it's important if people have a better understanding of exactly it is what you do. I mean, it's attractive enough and alluring enough to maybe win upwards of $300,000 to put in your own pocket, but also important to know exactly what your split of the 50/50 goes towards.
Well, we're completely self-funded. We get a very, very small grant from the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. I think it's in the neighborhood of about $11,000 a year. Everything else we do, we raise on our own because of the generosity of Newfoundlanders participating in our programs. Of course, the Ultimate Dream Home and now the 50/50 Ultimate. But the biggest thing when it comes to hearing loss is the isolation. And if you have a hearing loss, you're isolated from from your family, your coworkers, your loved ones. It's just pure isolation, and it happens in all ages when you discover you have hearing loss. And the issues that pop up as it relates to that is going to be the mental health issues that would come from that. So we have all of our programs and services are designed around to help mitigate that. And, we have support groups, we have speech reading classes, and that was a really great one. It's called Read Our Lips, that we've done actually internationally. We've actually been operating it in Australia for a number of years. And, of course, we have our loaner program, and we do all of this free of charge because of the generosity of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians participating in the lottery programs that we have and our fundraising endeavors.
Just a quick one, and it just popped in my head. It's not apropos of anything important, but was it not with you folks that we had that storytelling event down at the Geo Centre one night? Was that with you guys?
We did indeed, and Patty, I'm trying to resurrect that one again. That was absolutely amazing, and it was called The Joy of Sound. And it was during our I think it was our 35th anniversary as being an association here in the province. This year, of course, is our 40th anniversary. And, we had people telling stories and telling things about their lives in a crystal clear environment. We had all the assistive listening devices there. We had real-time captioning. And, everyone was able to participate in that. And it was a beautiful event. And it really brought home how important it is, to understand people that have hearing loss and what you can do to mitigate that and help their lives be improved.
I thought it was a great event too. I was there, and it seemed like people really enjoyed it, and it probably did change some of the conversation that we're having here today based on fundraising and what you can actually do inside your organization. I don't know if it was appropriate for me to pop that in. It just popped in my head.
No, listen, I'm glad that you did, because I have been trying to resurrect that one for a while, and I think it's a great initiative because, people need to be reminded that if they know someone who has a hearing loss, and we all do, for all intents and purposes, I think we all do, there's things that you can do to help them live a better life, just by not yelling at them, speaking face to face. Don't turn away when you're talking, and there's little things that you can do to help that. And of course that there just helps the individual who's been isolated from hearing loss, and doing the the outreach that we do, like that particular one and other ones that we do now constantly, it just reminds people how important it is that hearing loss is.
Absolutely. So you say, the approach should not be to raise your voice or to yell at somebody while you're trying to converse with someone with hard of hearing. So what should we do?
Well, the big thing is to, if you look someone straight in the face, the face is, we call it speech reading, because the face and the expressions and everything else will really help, the contextualize the conversation. It lets the individual see what you're saying on your lips, and it makes you focus on the individual who has the hearing loss. And that goes a long way, and it's very simple, but, you would not believe how that helps, and it really makes a big difference. And, of course, May is Speech and Hearing Month, and, we're trying to raise awareness of that and other types of strategies that you can have to help people, with hearing loss, because I know that we've all been sitting around a kitchen table somewhere or a dining room table, Christmas, whatever, and you have, either young people with hearing loss or, you have an elderly person there, and they're not participating in the conversation because they can't, because there's too much noise. And if you took the time to look them in the face and ask them questions and include them in the conversation, you'd be surprised.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. Give us the contact info one more time, whatever you'd like to say about the prize.
Okay, well, of course, midnight. So we have 12 hours and 45 minutes left. Right now we're over 294,000, so we're definitely going over 300,000 for sure with your help. Thank you very much, Patty. So you can get it at 5050ultimate.com. That's 5050ultimate.com. And the phone number is 709-800-6118, and we have Susan and Irene there ready to take your call. And, midnight tonight. And it's a great program, and it goes a long way to help your fellow Newfoundlanders and Labradorians participate in life more fully.
Appreciate your time, Terry. Good luck with it.
I appreciate yours, Patty, and thank you again.
My pleasure. Take care. Right. Bye-bye. All right, let's take a break. We'll see if Jim has a clear phone line when we come back. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Jim, you're on the air.
How are you, Paddy?
Doing okay. How about you?
Not bad, Paddy. I understand the government by who's doing this, the high cost of living's coming up. It seems like every year it's not going to stop because, It seems like grocery goes up probably 3 times. I don't know how many times in a year. I don't know how many times, but it seems like anybody got low income coming in, the government realise the more they push prices up on things, is people barely get by, like an electric bill or the groceries alone.
Well, I don't know what government really can do about the price of groceries, to be honest with you. I know in some parts of the world, like France people point to, they've put a cap on increases for the necessities inside grocery stores. But other than that, the price of groceries is a little bit different issue. Now, if you talk about the price of electricity, whether or not there should be tax on your home heating bill, all those things, that's something that government absolutely has control over. But there's a lot of cost of living issues that some of it may have been caused by the government, but they don't directly pull the trigger on increasing price.
Yeah, but it's shocking to what they're doing. These big companies out there makes different things and puts in the stores or whatever. And storekeepers got to make money on that. If the storekeepers wants to make money, the government makes money too, right? And taxes, what you pay. Wherever tax goes on stuff in the stores, the government gets all that money, right?
Government gets the taxes, yes. Well,
there you go. If they keep going price structure, it's just like you're paying more taxes. Then it seems like we're paying more than 15% to a dollar. Really, to me, when they're putting price up, I don't know. It's very strange what the government's doing to the people.
Yeah, you're only paying the prescribed amount of tax. It might feel different and feel more punitive, but the tax is what the tax is. And it does feel like we pay a lot for just about everything. I mean, for me, groceries are the number one go-to. We could talk about government's ability to control things like power bills and those types of things, but groceries is something we all share. Doesn't matter who you voted for, who you are, where you are, man or woman, child, the price of groceries is a major league problem. I mean, just go and try to shop for just a regular supper, and you see the very few items that you have on the belt, and then you go to pay, and it's $50 and you got very, very little, and you're not living high on the hog. It's not a meal full of tenderloin and scallops on the side. It's basics, and it costs an arm and a leg. There's no doubt about that.
And that's another thing they're talking about, sugar tax. Now, why all of a sudden, in 2 years, whatever, they made money on it, why all of a sudden now did they cut back on tax on it? And won't they cut back on more taxes? People still go in the store and buy affordable stuff they need. You can't look at meat in store these days or different kinds of foods. People just haven't got the money to buy it.
I know.
Is it just how can you enjoy a good life in this day and age? Here's the government, the big companies making all kinds of money off the income people. Low income people. And the seniors are the same way. They're making all the money off them. So I don't have to be doing the government's got to either keep raising checks up or give decent dollar on their checks, or push something down, because people are not going to be able to afford to live in their own homes and heat their homes. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know. I talk about it.
So it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better unless the government changes and then these big companies change. I doubt it very much. But there's something got to change, then they'll all do it.
Yes, is the short answer. Something has to give.
Well, I hope it do anyway. If they don't do that for the people, what's sense voting for them for the government liberals and the church? They're not doing very much as it is now. I think they're making it worse.
Okay.
That's my opinion anyway. Like they say, they don't care. Like sure, they take every cent away from you. Sure, if your electric bill say $500 a month in the winter, sure they don't care if you freeze it. They take all that money after these companies like the Light and Power. They don't care.
Well, they care about the shareholders. That's where I'll apply the care.
It really is. It's confusion. That's what it is. That's what they're doing to people. They confuse them, right?
Well,
so anyway,
possibly, yeah.
Well, they get their facts straight, the government, because it's going to get worse. Because, like I said, people are not going to be able to heat their homes, especially low-income people, senior citizens. Right? They got to do something, Paddy.
Fair enough. I appreciate the time, Jim. Anything else you'd like to say?
No, that's about it.
Okay, man. All the best. Stay in touch. Okay, bye-bye. Very quickly, I'm getting as if I have anything to do with the result in Terrebonne, Quebec. So, bunch of emails saying, well, Elections Canada has to ask for a redo for a by-election. Elections Canada doesn't have the legal authority. Plain and simple. Never have and never should have the ability to call a by-election. it has to be decided by a court. So the candidate, the voter, they can file an appeal for a judicial ruling as to whether or not there's going to be a by-election in Terrebonne. So I know there's lots of skepticism about Elections Canada and unfortunately skepticism about results, but this is just simply a matter of law. Elections Canada cannot do it. And same thing when you look at the law. Whether or not you think it's good or bad, they can't even try to count that one vote, which was the return to centre, which was a vote for the Bloc Québécois candidate, which would have resulted in a tie. But the law governing Elections Canada says they can't do it. Doesn't mean it's the end of the road, and it won't be. You can bet your bottom dollar there will be a court-filed challenge to this result. And my understanding is it can't be fought by the Bloc Québécois itself as a political party. It can be by the candidate, and it can be by the voter. Now, that might be splitting hairs because undoubtedly the Bloc will help financially speaking for any potential court challenge, but that's it. Elections Canada just can't do it. It doesn't matter who you're chair for. That's just not something available by law. Let's go to line number one. Good morning, Kimberly. You're on the air.
Hi, good morning, Patty.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm top shelf. How about you?
Good. I'm not too bad.
Good.
I just want to sincerely thank Councillor Terry Burns for standing up Monday night at the public council meeting for me and for all the citizens of Harbour Grace who deserve fairness, safety and proper representation. Councillor Burns did what true leaders are supposed to do: represent the people, speak the truth and put integrity before politics. That took courage and it meant a lot to me. I also want to acknowledge Councillor Peter Yetman for supporting Terry Burns that night and helping break the long silence. Your support showed citizens that not all councillors are turning a blind eye and that some are still willing to stand up for what's right. This isn't just about me. It's about transparency, accountability, and how anyone in Harbour Grace could end up in my shoes. I want to thank Terry and Peter. Your voices matters.
Can you tell us what they stood up and did or said?
Well, it's an issue that I've been having with the town of Harbour Grace and the neighbour. It's been ongoing for 2 years now. And a lot of things have happened in 2 years. I can summarize it somewhat, if you'd like. If I got into all the detail, I'd need your whole show.
Well, give us the Coles notes then, Kimberly. What's going on and what was said on your behalf?
So what happened was in 2017, the town issued a non-compliant permit to the fire chief, which is my neighbour, to construct a large pool and deck on top of my easement. In 2023, I encountered a water leak, and due to the non-compliance of my neighbours and the town officials, I was unable to access my water line. So for the next 5 months, my water supply was obtained through garden hoses via fire hydrant, which was approximately 300 feet away. So I had no support from the leaders of this town to intervene, even though they carried the authority to step in and do the legal and right thing, but they chose not to. I was ignored, lied to, mistreated, disrespected, bullied, and harassed throughout the whole ordeal. And over this period of time, and having been denied access to my easement, I was forced to obtain legal counsel, which thus far has cost me approximately $20,000. So after the 5 months, I was able to gain the access and replace my water line. So, I got my water supply back. So that was in November 2023. So in May of 2024, the town issued the fire chief another non-compliant permit to build the deck back over my easement, my water and sewer easement. That was in May 2024. So I appealed it with Municipal Affairs. So in September, we had the appeal hearing in St. John's, and the adjudicator ruled in my favor, and he ordered the town to revoke the permit. So in October, at the public council meeting, the town revoked the permit, but they gave the fire chief 6 months to remove the deck. Now, during the hearing in September, the fire chief told the adjudicator that this deck is he could have this deck down in hours, in a few hours. So why would the town give the fire chief 6 months to take down this deck? This deck is still obstructing my water and sewer lines. And, you know, it doesn't make sense to me. So, well, it does make sense, actually, because, you know, so right now there's an appeal gone in from my neighbour, the fire chief. He's appealing the order that was given by the town of Harbour Grace. Now, this order was, you know, it's coming from an adjudicator. So this appeal went in back in November, and we're still waiting on that appeal date. So the 6-month time frame was up on May the 5th past, and the deck still remains over my water and sewer line easement. You know, if I have, you know, any ongoing issues going on with my lines in the near future, I have zero access. And I don't want to be put back in the same situation I was in June of 2023.
Understood. So now give us an example of what a councillor or two said on your behalf before we get to the news.
Right, exactly.
So someone's standing up for you. That's the good thing here. And I'm sure they appreciate your kind words this morning, Kimberly, and I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks for doing it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, there we go. It's time for the news. When we come back, we're talking poverty. Don't go away.
The Tim Powers Show. Join the conversation weekday afternoons at 4 p.m. on your VOCM.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Robin, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing good myself. I wish I could say the same for my neighborhood. And so I just want to call and just hopefully put out a plea to the officials that have been elected to represent this area, because none of them come here. They're never here. They stopped responding to requests to meet back in 2023. And so I've really seen the impact. I'm actually standing here right now on the top of Carter's Hill. There's a triangle park here. And they just recently they put a garbage bin back that they had removed 3 years ago. And I don't know why. They said they removed the garbage bin, which is where it's the only grassy spot really where my dog will poop. But they removed the dog poop dispenser, the bags, and the garbage can. They also removed a very popular bus stop that has made it very difficult for people with mobility issues who live like around me to access, because they either have to walk up a steep hill or walk down a steep hill to access the bus now. So I want the government to understand. I've been watching the House. I watch their communications, and they have yet to acknowledge that there is an issue with poverty in this city. Whenever they are questioned or asked to speak about it, it's followed with defensive remarks. I could count how many times, if I had a nickel for every time Siobhan Cody listed off all the checks that she gave out in 2021. But that stuff is not reaching the people in my neighborhood. And we don't have access to health care down here, primary health care. And so if you're looking for some of the causes of the increased crime and that sort of thing, just know that had we had programs and supports in place throughout COVID to protect people who are vulnerable, we wouldn't be facing the crime that we're having right now. And so it really does a disservice to not acknowledge the pain and suffering that so many people are going through right now. And if they would only just acknowledge it, because by not acknowledging it, it allows other people to believe that the people who live here are not worth anything. And I'm seeing that playing out on social media, and it's really hard to watch.
Fair enough. The one comment I'll make is that...
I want your comments, please.
Sure. What we really need to be careful of, in my personal opinion, is like when we mention... the contributing factors with the revolving door at the provincial courts, and we talk about, court officers will say 80% of the people they see are dealing with an addictions issue or a mental health issue. I try to be careful in offering that number because you're poor, because you're addicted doesn't mean you're necessarily going to commit a crime. Because you have a mental health concern doesn't necessarily make you a criminal. Same thing when we talk about poverty and crime, poverty and interaction with the criminal justice system and or the healthcare system and or what it means for the family unit. We also have to be careful, in my opinion, to keep poverty as a poverty issue, not to have, and I'm not suggesting you do, but some people do, is the insinuation that if you're poor, eventually you're going to commit a crime or be addicted to something. You could be, but it doesn't mean you're going to be. So when we talk about poverty and its impact on society, I think that has to be a carefully crafted conversation versus thinking that poverty means the two aforementioned. A pending health disaster, physically, mentally, or otherwise, and the fact that you might become a criminal. That's where I think the conversation needs a little bit of nuance. And once again, not to suggest you're not offering that, but far too often that becomes the case.
Well, and I agree with you because I hear a lot of people think that the only people that are homeless are people who use drugs or have mental health issues. And I can assure you, I have seen a woman who was 80 years old trying to sleep on a bench in Bannerman Park at 10:30 one night. I see people all the time in my neighborhood. And so just to back up your point on the point that you made, I agree with you 100%. However, I know a lot of people in this neighborhood, and I have watched people who are vulnerable succumb to a life of drugs and crime because there was no support available to them, because child protection came and took the child without ever offering any support to the mom. So, it actually, I've seen it happen. I have several examples of it happening. So that's my mistake for not making that distinction, but it is absolutely a reality, and it's all preventable, Patty. It's all preventable.
And again, I was just trying to add to what is an important conversation, but to separate it out is also helpful. There's plenty of people in the middle class who can fall prey to mental health concerns, mental illness and otherwise. Plenty of people in my social circles can absolutely fall prey, maybe not as easily as someone living in poverty, can fall prey to the world of addictions. I think you understand the difference I'm trying to add to, because these complicated matters, when the discussion does not include the required nuance, a lot of important things get lost in the shuffle. And consequently, especially if policymakers, elected officials and otherwise, if they can't make the differences in their mind or the distinctions in their mind, if they can't nuance policy, then generally we're going to come up with bad policy.
Well, and another issue that I have been observing unfold is that the lack of engagement with actual citizens. So a lot of the information and the policy decisions are made from consultations with executive directors of these organizations who are not on the front lines. They don't see it. They sit in offices, they go to meetings, they put off events, which is their job. But it's actually really interesting because on The Signal, on Adam's show, he had an episode about a month back, which he has many of on housing and youth. And they brought in someone who, from Choices, who does the program in the junior highs. And the context that she was able to provide by understanding the entire context of a child's situation, as opposed to, anecdotes that they hear from their staff in the Monday, management meeting type of thing. So I think there needs to be less separation between our politicians and the actual citizens themselves, and the organizations that represent the citizens have to do a better job. Josh Smead does a wonderful job with this, with Food First NL, by allowing people to speak for themselves. Because if we don't allow them to do that, we are doing them a disservice. We're not helping them in the right way.
And fair enough. And that's where complicated issues require complicated conversations. But we live in a very complicated, but in public discourse, a very uncomplicated world. Everything is brought forward to be so simple, so fundamental. If we do this, we solve that. When if it was that easy, people would have solved this a long time ago. So I appreciate you bringing the attention forward and consultation with people, same as when we talked, like, for instance, and this is not the same conversation, but it's akin. A disability advocate, someone with lived experience, is a very helpful voice. Someone who's sitting at a desk filling out applications for bursaries and scholarships and grants and subsidies, they have a understanding of the issue, but not the intimate understanding, which helps drive good policy, because they're applying for current standing pots of money, as opposed to advocacy work where you can be a great advocate without the lived experience, but unless some of your messaging and understanding comes from people with lived experience, then you're just scratching at the surface, I would suggest. Even the most well-intentioned folks that are out there living in that advocacy world.
Absolutely. It has nothing to do with, people and their capabilities. It's the way the system has been designed. And it's really kind of in the luck, because I used to be one of those individuals working in it. And so I do know that there has been a major shift of kind of like holding funding as a, be good type of thing. And there have been comments made in the House of Assembly that, basically they don't want people speaking negatively about them in public. And so, again, that goes back to my original point, which is it's not fair to the people who are suffering. Like I think I mentioned this to you before, we were supposed to have the first family health team, primary care, because we're the most vulnerable population. We still don't have access. So when you go to St. Clair's and you're seeing all those people who are in rough shape, it's because they haven't had access to primary care in over a decade. So that's why our emergency rooms are filled, because you can't treat complex issues in an emergency room or a walk-in clinic.
Certainly not with one visit. Robin, I appreciate the time here this morning. Anything else quickly before I have to go?
Thank you for the time. That's it.
Anytime. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, final break of the morning. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go. Line number 1. Good morning, Adam. You're on the air.
Morning, Patty. How are you?
Not too bad at all. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm pretty good. I just wanted to pick up on the bit of a conversation you were having there earlier regarding almonds.
Yeah.
And I've used that example in multiple conversations before too. And I know that it sounds unimportant, and most people would just be like, who cares? It's just almonds. But it's just a one symptom of a much larger problem. The biggest almond producer in the world, I believe, I'm not 100% sure on the numbers off the top of my head, but it's something like this. They produce around about 80% of all the almonds consumed on the planet. And I'm pretty sure that they were in California. So we have the biggest almond producer on the planet growing almonds, requiring a lot of water in a place that is prone to drought and wildfire and water shortages. And I think it was in 2021, maybe 2022, that farm gave up. They just said, we can't do this anymore, and they stopped. And that was why the price of almonds that year spiked, skyrocketed. And I mean, that's just one example. If you're saying it's just almonds, who cares? That exact same thing, that problem of the centralization of our food production systems, it just propagates through everything, right? I mean, you think about a couple of years ago when you couldn't get your hands on a head of romaine lettuce.
Yep.
And that was the exact same problem. The biggest producer of romaine lettuce in North America, for sure, was down in the States, and they had all kinds of listeria outbreaks, and they had to recall all their product, and they couldn't produce it at the scale that they were usually producing it, and so you couldn't get it anymore, and so the price went through the roof.
And they had an insect infestation, which led to huge problems. I think the almond number you were referring to at 80% is actually the state of California, as opposed to just one farm. So California produces 80% of the almonds in the world. Then I think another water-thirsty crop that people point to, rightfully speaking, is avocados. So there's a lot to this, but your point regarding centralization is probably the key. Now, the almond production in California, I think, adds up to about $6 billion annually contribution to the GDP, but you have to do some math here. Is that $6 billion contribution to GDP, does that cover the water shortage, or does it pale in comparison to what the water shortage actually means for aquifers, Lake Mead, all the other big reservoirs, which are pretty much dry? So that's a calculation that's hard to make. It's not apples to apples or oranges to oranges. It might be apples to oranges, but one is access to clean water, clean potable drinking water, and the other is whether or not you get any almond milk in your tea.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the main solution here is to kind of do away with this some form of monopolization of our food production systems, because everything is just becoming more and more centralized like that. I mean, if you had almond production or any crop production spread out amongst many, many smaller farms, family-run farms like that all across North America, rather than these large factory farms and centralized locations that produce just things on ridiculous amounts of scale and then ship it out all over the continent, then you would do away with a lot of those problems, right? Like if there was somebody growing a small number of, I'll stick to the almond example, if you had a farm growing a small number of almond trees just to service their own local market, then that would not produce such a demand on the water demands in that area. And I think that that's what really needs to happen. I mean, we don't need any more mega farms. We need many, many smaller farms, family-run operations that actually care about how they're farming and care about the community that they're serving, and it's not being trucked or shipped 6,000 kilometers to get to the end consumer.
Yeah, now certain products are only ever going to be grown in certain climates. But point well taken. So if California shared some of that production with Nevada or New Mexico, or even a little further up the Pacific coast, which is probably still conducive to producing these products, then maybe, just maybe, there would be a change in market conditions. There might not be a change in the actual amount of water required, because that's also part of the conversation. You can grow the almond or the avocado wherever you want outside of, whether it be Baja in Mexico or in Southern California, but it's still going to require the water. But the point well taken.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different issues besides just the water as well, right? I mean, the negative impacts of large-scale monocultures like that are also well known, right? You know, you can't just grow one crop over the course of 10 or 15 or 20 acres and expect not to have any issues. I mean, if you've got any insect pests or anything that comes into a large monoculture field like that, then, I mean, you're just serving them up a buffet, and then the insects are going to become a major problem, and then the conventional way to deal with that problem is to spray all kinds of chemicals and insecticides and stuff on that field to make sure that you don't lose out on your yields and your profits and all that kind of thing, which is just causing even more environmental problems that you're going to have to contend with the following year and the following year.
Yeah, now I don't know how they do crop rotation or how they handle fallow field or anything like that, but I do know that I'll stick by my primary point is that when we talk about the absolute reality of prolonged droughts, aquifers drying up, some of the biggest reservoirs in some of the warmest parts of the world drying up, the fact of the matter is we're using a lot of that water, not for me and you to be nourished and to be able to drink and for other purposes, but we're putting it on golf courses and we're growing almonds and we're doing stuff that, look, the world needs different things. I get it. But to do that evaluation is going to be more important in the future. Water is now a commodity that's traded on the stock market. Now, there's always been pockets of that, you know, whether it be water for bottled product and whatnot, but actual access to liters of fresh water is being traded on the stock market. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the big scheme of things. Adam, you've had the final word, unless you want another 10 seconds.
Yeah, I just think that whole thing about the water is a little insane. I mean, I think that the capitalization of food, water, clean air, and shelter are things that should just not be happening. And I mean, the housing market is a prime example of how it's become more about money than about a human right. So I think those four things, shelter, water, food, and clean air, should be a given, not just those with a lot of money.
You got that right. Appreciate your time, Adam. Thanks a lot.
Perfect. Thanks, Patty. Have a good day.
You too, pal. Bye-bye. All right, good show today. Big thanks to all hands, and we will indeed pick up this conversation again tomorrow morning, right here on VOCM and Big Land FM's Open Line. On behalf of the producer, David Williams, I'm your host, Paddy Daly. Have yourself a safe, fun, happy day. We'll talk in the morning. Bye-bye.